The airlock opened, the stale oxygen of the ship mingling with the thin, acrid atmosphere of the colony. I stepped onto the landing platform, boots crunching on the plascrete, and surveyed the scene. It wasn't pretty. This wasn't my first time out here on the Fringe. I'd seen my share of backwater colonies, places where the Federation's shining ideals dulled and tarnished under the harsh realities of survival. But even by those standards, Lost Horizon looked like it was on its last legs. The habitat domes huddled together like frightened animals, their once gleaming surfaces scuffed and scratched. The hydroponics towers, designed to provide sustenance for the colony, were withered and brown. The few colonists I saw moved with a slow, defeated shuffle, their eyes hollow and haunted. I turned to the officer who had accompanied me from the shuttle. "Status report!" I barked. He snapped to attention, his face pale. "Sir, it's worse than we anticipated. The disappearance rate has accelerated. Almost a third of the population is gone in the last month alone. The rest are panicked, on the verge of—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Mutiny," I supplied, the word cold and hard in my mouth. He nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. I dismissed him with a wave and turned back to the grim panorama. I had been sent here to investigate the disappearances, to restore order, to prevent this colony from becoming another stain on the Federation's record. But as I looked out at the dying crops, the empty streets, the fear in the eyes of the survivors, I knew this was more than a simple rescue mission. This was a salvage operation, and the odds weren't in my favor. My name is Marcus Stone, and I am the new governor of Lost Horizon. I am a soldier, not a politician, and I have a feeling this is a war I'm not prepared to fight. But I am here, and I will do my duty, because out here on the Fringe, there is no one else to pick up the pieces when hope fails. I strode towards the nearest habdome, each step a heavy thud against the plascrete. The entryway opened, revealing a dimly lit interior. The air was thick with the smells of unwashed bodies and stale nutrient paste. A few ragged figures huddled in the corners, their eyes following me with fear and resentment. "Gather around," I ordered. They hesitated, then slowly shuffled towards me, forming a loose semicircle. I scanned their faces, noting the gaunt cheeks, the sunken eyes, the signs of malnutrition and despair. "I am Governor Stone," I announced. "I am here to investigate the disappearances and restore order to this colony." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mix of disbelief and nervous anticipation. A man stepped forward, his face drawn and weathered. "Governor, we've been abandoned. The Federation has forgotten us. The creatures—" He swallowed, his voice thick with terror. "They come in the night, snatching people from their beds. We're sitting ducks out here." "I am aware of the situation," I said, cutting him off, "and I assure you I will do everything in my power to protect this colony." I paused, letting my words sink in. "But I need your cooperation. I need information. Who was the last person to disappear? When? Where?" The colonists exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. I fixed my gaze on the man who had spoken earlier. "You," I said, pointing at him. "Tell me what you know." He hesitated, then took a deep breath. His name was Thomas. He was one of the farmers. Went missing 2 nights ago. We found his boots outside the hydroponics tower, covered in— He trailed off, his face paling. "Covered in what?" I pressed. "Some kind of slime," he whispered, "thick, viscous, and it glowed." This wasn't just a simple disappearance case. Something more sinister was happening on Lost Horizon, and I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. I dismissed the gathering and headed towards the hydroponics tower. The plascrete was rough under my boots, the emergency lighting casting eerie shadows. I reached the tower, its once white walls now stained and discolored. Outside I found the boots. They were standard-issue colonist gear, sturdy and worn, but now coated in a substance. It was indeed slimy. I crouched down, examining it closer. It seemed to be organic. I stood, a cold knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't the work of any known predator. It was something else, something alien. And it was hunting the colonists. Returning to the habdome, I found a technician hunched over a console, his fingers flying across the keys. "What are you doing?" I asked. He jumped, startled, then turned to face me. "Sir, I'm trying to access the colony's security logs, but the system's corrupted." "Keep trying," I ordered. "I need to see everything that happened the night Thomas disappeared." He nodded, his fingers resuming their frantic dance. I paced the floor, the silence broken only by the hum of the console and the breathing of the colonists huddled in the corners. After a while, the technician let out a triumphant shout. "I got it!" he exclaimed. "Security footage from the hydroponics tower!" I leaned in, watching the grainy images on the screen. It was Thomas, all right. He was working late, tending to the crops. Then a shadow fell over him, a monstrous form skittering into view. It was an amalgamation of crab and spider, its armored body glistening, its numerous eyes reflecting the light. It moved with alarming speed, its 8 hairy legs propelling it towards Thomas. The creature's pincers snapped shut around him, the sound repulsively loud even through the poor-quality speakers. In a matter of seconds, it was over, leaving behind only Thomas's boots and a trail of the strange iridescent slime. I stared at the creature, a cold dread settling over me. This was no mere animal. It was intelligent, purposeful. The disappearances were not random acts of violence. They were calculated hunts, and the colonists were the prey. The technician, his face ashen, turned to me. "What in God's name was that?" "Our enemy," I replied grimly, "and it seems we're at war." I ordered an immediate lockdown of the habdome, posting guards at every entrance. The colonists, already on edge, descended further into fear and paranoia. I tried to reassure them, promising swift action, but the doubt in their eyes mirrored my own. The next morning I assembled a small team of the colony's most able-bodied men. We armed ourselves with whatever we could find. Our first priority was to understand our enemy. We returned to the hydroponics tower, carefully avoiding the iridescent slime that still clung to the ground. I studied the creature's path, noting the way it moved, the patterns it left behind. It was clear that this was no mindless beast. It hunted with intelligence, choosing its victims with a purpose. We followed the trail of slime, which led us away from the tower and towards the colony's perimeter. As we neared the edge of the habdome complex, the slime trail abruptly ended. We scanned the surrounding terrain, our weapons at the ready. "There," one of the men whispered, pointing towards a ventilation shaft leading into one of the smaller, abandoned domes. The shaft was wide enough for a man to crawl through, but I had a sinking feeling that whatever lurked inside was far larger, far more dangerous. We approached cautiously. I motioned for the men to spread out, surrounding the shaft. "Ready your weapons," I instructed. The men raised their arms, their eyes wide with fear. I took the lead, easing my way into the shaft, the metal cold and gritty against my gloves. The air inside was stale and heavy. The light filtering in from outside barely pierced the gloom. I moved slowly, my senses on high alert, listening for the slightest sound. The shaft opened into a larger chamber, the remnants of some abandoned experiment or storage room. Broken crates and rusted equipment lay scattered about, covered in a thick layer of dust. And then I saw it. The arachnor was hunched in a corner, its multiple eyes glowing in the darkness. Its hairy legs splayed out, a disturbingly large version of a spider's web. It hadn't noticed us yet, its attention seemingly focused on something in the center of the room. I followed its gaze, and my blood ran cold. There, on a crude operating table, lay the remains of Thomas. His body was mutilated, his skin torn and flayed, his insides exposed. But it wasn't just the sight of his remains that chilled me. It was the way the arachnor was interacting with them. It wasn't feeding, it was experimenting, probing the body with its pincers, injecting some kind of fluid with a needle-like appendage. It was as if the creature was trying to understand, to learn. I raised my weapon, took aim at the creature's exposed abdomen, and fired. The laser beam sizzled through the air, striking the arachnor with a loud crack. It reared up, screeching in pain and surprise, its multiple eyes swiveling towards us. The men behind me opened fire, their lasers and weapons filling the chamber with light and noise. The arachnor lunged, its pincers snapping shut like a trap. I dove to the side, narrowly avoiding its attack. The creature turned, its attention now fully focused on us. The hunt was on. The chamber erupted into chaos. The arachnor, enraged and wounded, charged, its multiple legs skittering across the floor. "Scatter!" I yelled, diving behind an overturned crate. The men scrambled for cover as the creature's pincers snapped and its hairy legs lashed out. One of the men let out a scream as the spider crab's armored body slammed into him, crushing him beneath its weight. I squeezed the trigger of my laser, sending another bolt into the creature's flank. It let out a piercing shriek, but its advance didn't falter. It was too fast, too strong. Another man went down, his leg caught in the creature's spidery grip. He cried out in agony as the pincers closed around his thigh, severing it with a gruesome crunch. "Fall back!" I commanded, firing another shot as I retreated towards the ventilation shaft. The remaining men, their faces pale with terror, followed my lead, scrambling through the narrow passage. We emerged into the sunlight, gasping for air, the sounds of the creature's rage behind us. We had escaped, but at a terrible cost. 2 men dead, another grievously wounded. The reality of the situation hit me hard. This was no mere infestation. We were facing an intelligent, adaptive enemy, one that was far more dangerous than we had initially believed. Back in the relative safety of the main habdome, I barricaded the entrance to the ventilation shaft. The injured man was tended to as best as we could with the colony's meager medical supplies. The mood was somber. The faces around me reflected despair. "This is a lost cause," one of the men muttered. "We're all gonna die here." "Silence!" I barked, the authority in my voice cutting through the gloom. "We are not defeated. We will find a way to survive this." But even as I spoke the words, doubt gnawed at me. We were outmatched and facing an enemy we barely understood. Yet I couldn't allow despair to take hold. If we gave up now, we were as good as dead. We needed a plan, a new strategy, something that would give us an edge, a fighting chance. And then a thought struck me. "Where is the research lab?" I asked, my voice sharp. The technician looked up, his eyes widening in surprise. "The old one. It's been sealed off for years." "Take me there," I ordered. He hesitated, then nodded reluctantly, leading me through a maze of corridors to a sealed door. It took us several minutes to bypass the security system, the ancient tech creaking and groaning in protest. The door opened, revealing a laboratory. The air was thick with the smell of chemicals and decay. Rows of empty cages lined the walls, their metal bars twisted and bent as if something had violently broken free. I stepped inside, my boots clanging on the cold tile floor. The technician followed hesitantly, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "What were they researching here?" I asked, my voice low. "They were experimenting," he stammered, "on the local fauna, trying to create hybrids." I stopped, a cold dread creeping up my spine. Hybrids? What kind of monstrosities had they unleashed upon this colony? The technician pointed to a terminal in the corner. "The logs might still be intact," he said. "We might be able to find out what they created." I moved towards the terminal. This could be our salvation, or our doom. But one thing was certain, we needed to know the truth. The terminal whirred to life, its screen showing lines of code and data. The technician, his fingers dancing across the keys, muttered to himself as he navigated through the files. After a tense few minutes, he let out a low whistle. This is bad," he said, his voice shaking. "They were splicing genes, combining the DNA of local wildlife with something else." "Something else?" I asked. "Extraterrestrial," he replied, his eyes wide with horror. "They were experimenting with alien DNA." The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, forming a picture far more horrifying than I had ever imagined. The disappearances, the creature, the experiments. It was all connected. The technician continued scrolling through the logs, his face growing paler with each passing moment. "There's more," he whispered. "The hybrids. They were designed for warfare, enhanced strength, aggression, adaptability." I felt a surge of anger, followed by a deep sense of betrayal. The Federation had sent these scientists here to study alien life, not to weaponize it. They had played God, and now we were reaping the consequences. "What about a cure?" I asked, desperation edging into my voice. "Did they find a way to reverse the process?" The technician shook his head. "No. The logs end abruptly. It seems the project was abandoned, or went horribly wrong." I closed my eyes, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. We were trapped on a dying colony, hunted by a creature born of twisted science, with no hope of rescue. "We need to find out more," I said, my voice firm. "There has to be someone who knows what happened here. Someone who can help us understand this creature. This arachnor." The technician nodded, his fear momentarily replaced by determination. "There was one scientist who always kept to himself," he said. "Dr. Brenner. He was the lead researcher on the project." "Find him," I ordered. "Bring him to me." The technician nodded and left to search for Dr. Brenner. I was left alone in the lab, surrounded by the ghosts of failed experiments and the lingering scent of unethical science. I moved deeper into the lab, examining the equipment and notes scattered around. The place was a mess, the aftermath of the panicked evacuation that must have occurred when the project spiraled out of control. Among the rubble, I found a datapad containing a series of cryptic entries. Specimen 5X12, one entry read. Increased aggression, heightened sensory perception, subject exhibiting unpredictable behavior, containment breach imminent. Another entry, dated a few days later, spoke of a mass escape and the loss of valuable assets. The final entry, written in a frantic scrawl, simply said, "It's too late. We've lost control." These scientists had not only created a monster, but they had also unleashed it upon the colony. And now it was hunting us down, one by one. I was jolted out of my thoughts by the sound of footsteps. The technician returned, accompanied by a disheveled man with wild eyes and a scraggly beard. "Governor Stone," the technician said, his voice strained. "This is Dr. Brenner." The scientist stared at me, his eyes filled with fear and defiance. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Answers," I replied, my voice cold and hard. "Tell me everything you know about the arachnor." Brenner hesitated, then let out a bitter laugh. "It's not a spider, you fool. It's a bioengineered weapon, a masterpiece of genetic manipulation. And it's perfect." I grabbed him by the collar, pulling him close. "Perfect? It's killing your people, Brenner. It's slaughtering innocent colonists." "Collateral damage," he sneered, his breath hot on my face. "Necessary sacrifices for the advancement of science." I wanted to strike him, to wipe that smug look off his face. But I needed him alive. He was the key to understanding the creature, the only hope we had of finding a weakness. I released him, stepping back. "You will tell me everything you know," I said, my voice dangerously low, "or you will suffer the consequences." Brenner stared at me for a long moment, then fear crossed his eyes. He knew I meant it, and as he began to speak, I knew that the dark truth of Lost Horizon was about to be revealed. Brenner's words spilled out in a torrent of twisted pride and scientific jargon. He spoke of the arachnor as his magnum opus, a being designed to adapt and overcome any obstacle. The alien DNA, he explained, was the catalyst, accelerating the creature's evolution beyond anything nature could have achieved. "We found it," he said, his eyes gleaming with a manic light. "A derelict spacecraft buried beneath the ice. Inside, we discovered samples of alien biological material. The potential was limitless." My stomach twisted as he described the gruesome experiments, the splicing and dicing of genes, the creation of countless failed prototypes. He spoke of the creature's intelligence, its ability to learn and adapt, its insatiable hunger for knowledge and flesh. "It's not just a predator," Brenner said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's a collector. It absorbs the genetic material of its prey, incorporating it into its own. It's constantly evolving, becoming stronger, smarter." I felt a cold dread settle over me. This wasn't just a threat to Lost Horizon. This was a potential extinction-level event. If the Arachnor wasn't stopped, it could consume the entire planet, leaving behind a wasteland. "How do we kill it?" Brenner smiled, a cruel twist of his lips. "You can't. Not with conventional weapons. It's too adaptable." I grabbed him again, my fingers digging into his scrawny neck. "There has to be a way," I snarled. "Tell me, or so help me God, I'll—" He coughed, struggling to breathe. "The serum," he gasped. "The genetic stabilizer. It's the only thing that can slow it down, make it vulnerable." I released him. "Where is it?" "In the lab," he wheezed, rubbing his throat. "Hidden. Behind a false panel. In the specimen storage unit." I didn't waste any time. I turned and ran, leaving the technician to guard Brenner. The lab seemed even more ominous now. The shadows deeper, the silence more oppressive. I found the specimen storage unit, a massive freezer-like contraption in the back of the room. My hands shook as I fumbled with the controls, the cold air biting at my skin. Finally, the door hissed open, revealing rows of shelves filled with vials and containers. I searched frantically, my eyes scanning the labels until I found what I was looking for. Genetic Stabilizer X13. I grabbed a vial, feeling a surge of adrenaline. But as I turned to leave, I heard a noise behind me. A skittering, scraping sound. I turned slowly, dreading what I might see. There, in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the corridor, stood the Arachnor. Its multiple eyes gleamed with hunger, its pincers poised to strike. Adrenaline surged through me as I slammed the freezer door shut, the heavy metal a flimsy barrier between me and the creature on the other side. My heart pounded in my ears, a drumbeat of terror and defiance. I knew I had mere seconds before it broke through. The vial of genetic stabilizer felt cold and heavy in my hand, a lifeline in the face of impending doom. I stumbled back, my eyes fixated on the door, searching for any sign of movement. The metallic groan of the hinges filled the air. I threw myself to the side as the door buckled inward, splintering under the Arachnor's immense strength. The creature scuttled through the opening, its numerous eyes gleaming. It was even more terrifying up close. With a cry, I hurled the vial at the creature. It shattered against its armored carapace, showering the air with a fine mist. The Arachnor paused, its movements becoming erratic. It writhed and twitched, its legs flailing as the stabilizer took effect. I scrambled to my feet. The creature was vulnerable, but for how long? I had to act fast. I snatched up a discarded metal pipe and charged. The Arachnor, disoriented and weakened, lashed out blindly. I dodged its flailing limbs, feeling the rush of air as its pincers snapped shut inches from my face. I swung the pipe with all my might, striking the creature's head with a resounding clang. It recoiled, a high-pitched screech escaping its many mouths. I pressed the attack, raining blows upon its body. The creature stumbled, its movements sluggish, its iridescent glow fading. With a final lunge, I drove the pipe into one of its eyes. A milky fluid oozed out, and the Arachnor let out a deafening shriek of pain. It staggered back, its legs collapsing beneath it. I watched as the creature, once a terrifying apex predator, crumpled to the floor, its body convulsing as it slowly succumbed to the stabilizer. I stood over the corpse, panting, my body trembling. My breath rasped in my throat, the silence of the lab broken only by the dripping of the strange fluid from the Arachnor's ruptured eye. I stood there for a long time, the weight of what I'd done sinking in. This was just one creature, and Brenner had made it clear there were more. The technician returned, his face pale. "What happened?" he stammered, taking in the scene. "The serum worked," I said, my voice rough. "But it's a temporary solution at best." I looked at Brenner, who was watching me with a disturbingly detached curiosity. "How many more are there?" A sly grin spread across his face. "More than you can imagine, Governor," he said. "This was just the prototype. The others are far more advanced." I turned to Brenner, my eyes narrowing. "You're coming with me," I said. "You're going to help me end this nightmare you created." He didn't resist, his eyes fixed on some distant point as if lost in thought. We left the lab, the heavy door sealing shut behind us. As we made our way back to the main habdome, a sense of unease settled over me. The colony felt eerily quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by a deathly silence. We reached the central hub, where I had left the remaining colonists huddled together. But the room was empty, save for a few scattered belongings and a smear of the iridescent slime on the floor. My heart sank. They were gone, taken by the creatures. The full weight of my failure crashed down on me. I had come here to save them, to protect them, but I had only led them to their doom. I looked at Brenner, my eyes filled with rage. "This is your fault!" I spat. "You did this!" He simply smiled, a chillingly serene expression on his face. "Evolution is a messy business, Governor," he said. "But it is also inevitable. The strong survive, the weak perish. It's the natural order of things." I wanted to strike him, to silence his twisted logic, but I held myself back. I needed him alive, if only to make him witness the end of his creations. "We have to assume they're still alive," I said, my voice tight with barely suppressed fury. Brenner remained silent, his eyes cold and distant. I shoved him towards the nearest exit. "Lead the way, Doctor! Show me where your abominations took them." We followed a trail of the iridescent slime, a macabre breadcrumb trail leading us deeper into the heart of the colony. It snaked through the abandoned streets, past empty hydroponics towers and darkened living quarters. Each step filled me with a growing sense of dread, the silence amplifying the feeling of isolation and impending doom. We arrived at the edge of the colony. The slime trail continued into a cave, its mouth a dark void in the cliff face. I hesitated, the darkness within promising untold horrors. "Don't worry, Governor," Brenner said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Your new friends are eager to meet you." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the encounter. I drew my sidearm, a standard-issue pulse pistol, and stepped into the cave. The darkness enveloped me like a shroud, the only illumination coming from the faint glow of the slime on the cave floor. The air was cold and damp, the silence broken only by the dripping of water and the distant scuttling of unseen creatures. We followed the slime trail deeper into the cave, the passage narrowing with each step. The walls closed in around us, the rock pressing against my shoulders, making it difficult to breathe. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in the shadows. The slime trail ended abruptly in the center of the chamber, where a freakish tableau awaited us. The colonists were there, their bodies twisted and contorted. Some were still alive, their eyes wide with terror, their limbs twitching spasmodically. Others were not. Their flesh was torn and mangled, their insides spilling out in a horrifying display of body horror. And in the midst of it all, looming over its victims like a monstrous overseer, was the arachnor. It was larger than the one I had encountered in the lab. Its multiple eyes locked onto us, and a low growl rumbled from its many mouths. I raised my pistol, but my hand trembled. I had faced death before, but never like this. Never in the face of such a hideous perversion of nature. Brenner, his eyes gleaming with a twisted excitement, stepped forward. "Behold," he said, his voice amplified in the cavern, "the future of evolution." The arachnor lunged, its pincers snapping, its legs propelling it towards us with terrifying speed. My pulse quickened, mirroring the skittering advance of the arachnor. Brenner, the architect of this nightmare, stood frozen, a morbid fascination painting his face. I fired, the pulse pistol's report shattering the silence of the cavern. The energy bolt struck the creature's armored shell, deflecting with a shower of sparks. It barely registered the impact. its multiple eyes fixated on me with an unsettling intelligence. The arachnor lunged, its numerous legs propelling it forward with astonishing speed. I dove to the side, rolling across the damp cave floor, the stench of decay filling my nostrils. The creature's pincers snapped shut inches from my face, a gust of fetid air washing over me. I scrambled to my feet, firing another shot as I retreated. This time the bolt found its mark, striking one of the creature's multiple eyes. A yellow fluid oozed from the wound, but it didn't slow the creature down. It was upon me again, its legs moving with lightning speed, its pincers snapping like a macabre metronome. I raised my pistol, squeezing the trigger repeatedly, but the energy bolts seemed to have little effect on its armored hide. In desperation, I threw myself to the ground, rolling beneath its bulk. The creature screeched in frustration, its legs scraping against the cave floor as it tried to turn. I saw my chance and scrambled towards the wall, searching for a foothold. My fingers found a crack in the rock face and I pulled myself up, my boots slipping on the damp surface. The arachnor, enraged by my escape, turned and charged. I pressed my back against the wall, my heart pounding. It reared up, its pincers extended, ready to crush me. But just as it struck, a figure emerged from the darkness, moving rapidly to intercept the creature's attack. It was the technician. He had returned, armed with a flamethrower fashioned from salvaged parts. He unleashed a torrent of fire, engulfing the arachnor in a roaring inferno. The creature shrieked, its body sizzling and crackling. It thrashed wildly, its movements becoming increasingly erratic as the flames consumed it. The air filled with the stench of burning flesh and singed hair. Finally, with a last cry, the arachnor collapsed, its body a charred husk. The flames died down, leaving a smoking crater in the center of the cavern. I slid down the wall, my legs weak with relief. The technician approached, his face grim. "We need to go," he said. "There may be more of them." I staggered to my feet, my muscles aching, my mind reeling. The scene before me was a tableau of horror. The bodies of the colonists, some contorted in death, others whimpering in pain, were a stark contrast to the smouldering remains of the arachnor. Brenner surveyed the carnage with a clinical eye. "Remarkable," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Even in death it continues to adapt. The exoskeleton shows signs of increased heat resistance." I glared at him, disgust twisting my gut. "You find this fascinating?" I spat. "Your creations are slaughtering innocent people, and all you can think about is their damn evolution." He shrugged, a nonchalant gesture that sent a fresh wave of fury through me. "Science is not concerned with morality, Governor. It merely seeks to understand the universe, to uncover its secrets, regardless of the cost." "The cost is too high," I growled, gesturing towards the bodies of the colonists. "These people paid the ultimate price for your hubris." Brenner's eyes narrowed with annoyance. "They were expendable," he said dismissively. "A small sacrifice for the greater good of scientific advancement." I grabbed him by the collar, pulling him close. "You heartless bastard!" I snarled. "You don't deserve to live!" He struggled against my grip, his face turning purple. I could feel the pulse of life thrumming beneath my fingertips, a fragile thread that I could easily sever. But something held me back. As much as I wanted to kill him, I knew I couldn't. Not yet. I released him, shoving him away. "You're coming with us," I said, my voice cold and hard. "You're going to help us clean up this mess you made." He coughed, gasping for air. "And then what?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "You'll kill me anyway. You think that will solve anything? There are others out there, creatures far more advanced than this one. They'll come for you, Governor. They'll come for us all." We had defeated one monster, but it was clear that we were not safe. The darkness that had consumed Lost Horizon was spreading, its tendrils reaching out to consume us all. We turned our attention to the survivors. We carried the wounded back to the main habdome, leaving the dead behind as a grim reminder of the horrors we faced. The technician went ahead to prepare medical supplies, while I stayed behind to assess the situation. For the next few days, we salvaged what we could from the ravaged colony, fortifying the main hab dome, rationing supplies, and tending to the wounded. The survivors, haunted by their ordeal, moved like ghosts, their eyes hollow with trauma. Brenner, confined to a cell, showed no remorse for his actions, only a cold curiosity about the creatures he had unleashed. His detachment was both infuriating and unsettling, a constant reminder of the darkness lurking beneath the surface of human ambition. As the days turned into weeks, we learned to live with the ever-present threat of the creatures. We ventured out in heavily armed patrols, scavenging for resources and searching for signs of other survivors. Each excursion was a nerve-wracking gamble, a dance with death in a hostile environment. The creatures, emboldened by our weakened state, grew bolder in their attacks. They stalked us from the shadows, their multiple eyes gleaming in the darkness. We fought back with everything we had, but our victories were few and far between. The genetic stabilizer was a precious resource, its effects temporary and unreliable. One night, as we huddled around a fire, the technician turned to me. "We can't keep this up, Governor," he said. "We're losing. We're all going to die." I looked at him, seeing the fear and exhaustion mirrored in his eyes. I wanted to offer words of comfort, but the truth was I didn't have any. We were trapped in a nightmare, a hell of our own making. As I stood on the edge of the crater, I made a decision. I would not let Brenner's legacy of destruction continue. I would use his research, his twisted knowledge to find a way to eradicate these creatures once and for all. We retrieved Brenner, his face pale and drawn. He offered no resistance, his eyes fixed on the smouldering ruins of his life's work. I handed him a vial of the genetic stabilizer. "Drink this," I commanded. He hesitated, then raised the vial to his lips and swallowed the contents. His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in suspicion. "What did you give me?" he demanded. "A taste of your own medicine," I replied, a cold smile spreading across my face. "A modified version of the stabilizer. It won't kill you, but it will make you desirable." Brenner's eyes widened in horror as he realized what I had done. I shoved him towards the mouth of the cave. "Go back to your creations," I said. "They're hungry." He stumbled, then turned to face me, his eyes filled with hatred and fear. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "Maybe," I replied, raising my pistol, "but you won't be around to see it." I pulled the trigger, ending Brenner's reign of terror. He crumpled to the ground, his body twitching as the creatures emerged from the cave, their many eyes fixed on their new prey. As I watched them drag Brenner's body into the darkness, I felt a surge of satisfaction. He had gotten what he deserved, a fitting end for a man who had played God and lost.